Hi everybody, welcome back to the Shoemaker Report with Hoshea Allen. In this class, we're going to continue to develop what we learned in the last class about the real meaning behind Yeshayahu's statements regarding Mashiach in chapter 52 and 53 of that famous prophetic book, the book of Isaiah. So if you haven't listened to it already, you need to go back and learn part one. Take the time, and that'll really help you to understand what we're going to talk about today. All we covered last time was actually one verse, which was chapter 52 and verse 13, which really sets the tone for the entire passage in the Sefer of Yeshayahu. I'm not going to go through it all here, but a quick review. We're actually going to go through the Ramban's Perush, his commentary on those verses. We're going through it word for word, very carefully, step by step. It came to my attention a while back that there's really not anywhere that I'm aware of out there on the internet that actually is available, this kind of information in English that goes through this commentary verse by verse, explanation by explanation, to help everybody who wants to know the truth from a Jewish point of view, what actually these psukim mean. So I felt that it was important to do this, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to take as many classes as we needed to go through it. What we learned from last class, in quick review, is verse 13 in chapter 52 sets the tone. And we learned there, the verse says, Hine Yaskil Avdi. That Hashem says there would be this servant of Hashem. And the servant of Hashem would has such tremendous seichel, such tremendous chokhmah, such wisdom, such understanding, beyond three levels of beings, beyond the level of Avraham Avinu, in the sense that Avraham was great at teaching emunah and faith and the reality of Hashem in the world, and he made many, many gerim. Lots of converts came into the truth through Avraham. But this man, Mashiach, would be even greater than Avraham. Then we learned he would be also greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. How can anybody be greater than Moshe Rabbeinu? I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu brought down our holy Torah from Hashem at Har Sinai. How is that even possible? But Mashiach himself is greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. How so? Moshe Rabbeinu redeemed Klal Yisrael from one nation, from the nation of Egypt. But Mashiach is going to redeem Klal Yisrael from all the nations, from the entire world. In that sense, greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. Not greater than Moshe Rabbeinu in the sense that Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest of the prophets who brought down our Torah. Not in that sense, but in the sense of redemption, certainly greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. And third, we learned that Mashiach was greater than who? You remember? He's greater than the ministering angels. The ministering angels. You know, beings like Gabriel and Michael and Nuriel, and Raphael. All of the nations of the world, the 70 nations of the world, have their own ministering angel. And they're not always on the side of good. They're battling up there as well, just like people down here battle. Just like kings down here battle, because their ministering angels up there also battle. And so a lot of those angels up there that are in charge of various nations, like Pras, Iran, right, like Rome, Asav, and so on, these beings, these great ministering angels, they don't necessarily want Mashiach to come, because that means that their own power is going to be diminished. So there's wars against that. And the Medrash says that Mashiach himself is greater than all of the ministering angels. That's what we learn in verse 13. Now what we're going to do today is we're going to go to verse 14. We're going to read it, we're going to unpack it, we're going to read what the Ramban says, and we're going to go step by step by step. So get your notes out. If you don't have your notes and you're watching on YouTube, you can easily just pick up a copy of Yeshayahu, turn to chapter 52, verse 14, and here we go. It says the following: Kasher shamamu alecha rabim, ken mishchat meish marehu, v'to aro mi bnei adam. All right, there's actually three separate statements in this one pasuk. The first part says, Kasher shamamu alecha rabim. What those words mean is just as the rabim. Who are the rabim? Means the public. Everybody, most everybody in the world. That's the rabim. So it's Kasher shamamu alecha rabim. Just as the rabim, most of the people in the world, the public, basically, that they were what? They were shamamu about Mashiach. The key in these four words is understanding what the word shamamu means. If you read different English translations, you're going to get the theology. I hate to use the word, but I'll use it because that's where it's coming from. You're going to get theology spin on what that word really means. If it's going to be coming from a non-Jewish source and a non-authentic Torah source, you're going to get imported ideas into the meaning of these words. And what we're trying to do here is not to dafka translate the words into a cohesive translation, but simply leave them in Hebrew and explain them. And then you walk away with this awareness that I think is a much more useful to you than a word-for-word translation. So now we're going to go through what does it mean. The word shamamu really means shocked. Shocked, surprised, stunned, astonished. Now some of the translations actually use that word, like startled. But it's more than just being startled. It's about an existential shock straight to the very depths of a person's being. That's what the word means. And the peoples of the world are literally shocked. They are in disbelief. It's another way that you could put it. It's not like just they don't believe, but it's a shocking concept in their minds that doesn't make any sense. They are completely befuddled. Maybe another way you can understand the word shamamu. Just as they are completely and totally stunned, shocked, bewildered, astonished. That's the idea of shamamu. So it's a combination of a lot of ideas: disbelief, confusion, shock. But it doesn't just stay with that. It has output. What's the effect of that kind of emotional feeling? What comes out of that is an easier willingness to mock and to belittle what it is that you are shocked about. This is well known, that when people are confronted with something which is existentially contrary to the whole system, the whole mental system, they have two choices really viable to them. One is to dismiss it completely so that they can maintain the facade of their own interior structure that they built for themselves. And many people, that's much easier to do. They just say, no, I cannot deal with that. It doesn't fit into my framework. This is what the Rabbim was doing here. They are aware of Mashiach, sort of. They have knowledge, but it doesn't fit into their worldview. And as a result, what are they choosing to do? Discard it. The intelligent person says, wait a second, if this is true, if I have authenticated that these words are true, now I may have to readjust what I've lived with. May have readjust with what I've always assumed. That's the difference between the Rabbim and the few. The few who are the maskilim. We learned about them last week. The maskilim. These are the tzaddikim. These are true, holy, authentic Jews who say, wait a second. This is what our Masorah says. They're not going to be fooled. They're not going to be able to be manipulated. But the Rabbim, they're going to be fooled. They're going to be confused, and they're not going to allow themselves to change their interior in order to fit the exterior truth. That's the meaning of kasher shamamu alecha Rabbim, that they just cannot handle. Their minds are blown by what the prophet actually reveals about Mashiach himself. That's what those four words mean. Now, before we go to the rest of the pasuk, let's now dive right into the Ramban and read his words on that to see that, in fact, hopefully I've been careful to try to explain in my own words what we're going to see here in the Ramban's words. All right, he says, V'amar HaKatuv b'Mashiach. This pasuk, V'amar HaKatuv b'Mashiach. This pasuk is talking about the Mashiach. That's what he says. And remember, this is not the pshat. This is the medrash level understanding. We learned about that again last week. And if you don't understand what I'm saying right now about that, go back and learn lesson 1. But we're not talking about the pshat. We're not talking about the plain basic meaning of the words, which actually refers to Klal Yisrael in general. We're talking about the medrash, the medrash understanding of it, which is referring to Mashiach. And that's where the Ramban is coming from. Okay, now he quotes the pasuk, like we just said. Kasher shamamu alecha Rabbim. Just like, or as the Rabbim, the public, was completely shocked and like stunned about him. That's what the words mean. Now comes the Ramban's words. Rotzeh lomar means he wants to say, meaning he's now going to explain the real meaning of those words. What were they shocked about? What were they so stunned about? What were they so bewildered about? What didn't they believe? What was their emotional reaction to it all? He tells us, Kasher shamamu alecha lahalig b'cha b'tchilat bo'acha. This is the key meaning, according to the Ramban, what these words mean. Let's unpack it. He says, what do the words kasher shamamu alecha mean? That the people were shocked and stunned and like completely astonished by the truth of Mashiach. What was their reaction? Lahalig b'cha, to mock you. To mock you, I'm saying mock him, but he's saying to mock you. People mocking Mashiach. How could you mock Mashiach? Like, think about this. But this is what our prophet has said, and this is what a great sage, the Ramban, is telling us, is the meaning that when people were so shocked, so stunned, so astonished, and they were faced with the reality that went so much against what they expected and what they wanted to be true, the reaction is lahalig, to mock. Which is exactly what happens today. It's not so bizarre. You ever try to explain to somebody something that you know to be so true, and yet you're talking to somebody who really, quote, can't hear it or doesn't want to hear it? For whatever personal reasons, they may have to deal with themselves and they don't want to do that. So what will they do? You'll almost always encounter what? Mocking. They'll mock you because they cannot reason with you, because that requires real intelligence, real seichel, logic, good, clear thinking. And they don't have that. They have an emotional reaction to something that doesn't fit their own worldview. And so the easy way out is to mock. Because really, when somebody mocks you, you can't respond to that, not in any intelligent fashion, because you were not confronted with an intelligent argument. That's why when somebody mocks you or mocks Mashiach, it's very strong defense. You can't do much with that. But they didn't just mock when Mashiach is revealed in all of his glory. Clearly not. Who could mock such a thing at that point? Such a being, such a man at that point? You can't. It's so obvious. We're going to get to that. But what does the Ramban say? He says they mocked you b'tchilat bo'acha, at the beginning of your coming. What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that he came one time 2,000 years ago and that's where they mocked him, and now he's coming 2,000 years later, chas v'shalom, and all that period of time, they were mocking him 2,000 years ago. No, that's not what it means. It's the same man in the beginning of his coming. Not two comings, the beginning of a continuous coming. This is what the plain words are. We cannot import, extraneous theological ideas into our Torah. There's a beginning of his coming that continues on and unto the culmination of his coming. In other words, the revelation of Mashiach is a process. It's a process. And in the very beginning, when things are unclear, when Mashiach doesn't look the way people want him to look, when he doesn't appear the way they want him to appear, when people mock him, that's the beginning of his coming. But the beginning of his coming is not the ultimate revelation of Mashiach. It's just the start. Eventually, time goes on, time unfolds. This man who is Mashiach, people don't think he's Mashiach. He hasn't declared him to be Mashiach. He's, as we're going to learn, he's disgraced and he doesn't look proper. He doesn't look majestic, and he's got sicknesses, and it doesn't look like a Mashiach's supposed to look. So there's a mocking. That's the beginning of his coming. And so people, in their foolishness and in their ignorance, will take advantage of that confusion of Mashiach in the beginning of his coming, and they'll mock. Now, in their own heads, to give them credit, they're not mocking Mashiach because they don't know he's Mashiach. They're just mocking somebody that to them looks ridiculous, appears ridiculous, doesn't make any sense. And so the tendency is to mock what you cannot understand. But if they knew he truly was Mashiach, they wouldn't be mocking him. So they're confused, like it says, shamamu. They're shocked, they're stunned, they're astonished. Nothing makes sense to them. That's what the Ramban is saying. Our holy Navi, Yeshayahu, is actually telling us. Let's go on with more of these words. For Amru, Ha'ish, Hanivzeh, Hazeh. And they say, this disgraced man. So if you want to know, if you want to be looking, you want to have a little bit of awareness what the early coming of Mashiach might be looking like, you want to be looking for an ish hanivzeh, hazeh, a disgraced man. Somebody who does not receive in glory, who's not up there, on center stage, is not praised, but just the opposite. Somebody in the beginning of his coming is disgraced, is humiliated, and, like the Ramban said, is mocked. What doesn't make sense to the people of the world? They say this. They say, Ha'ani v'rochev al ha'chamor. Now that's a quotation from another Navi, the prophet Zechariah. He says that Mashiach comes, what? A poor person riding on a donkey. In our Torah tradition, it's not a literal man riding on a literal donkey. It is an image. And Rashi tells us what the image means. He tells us that it means that he's slow, coming along slowly, like a donkey walks, slowly plodding along. He's not riding, quote, symbolically a horse, looking majestic and glorious and everything. Wow, look at this beautiful. No, he's riding a simple animal and it's just coming along, plodding slowly. That's what the Navi means, and that's what Zechariah means when he says Mashiach is ani v'rochev al ha-chamor, on the donkey, a donkey rider. Mashiach is a donkey rider. Again, not in a literal sense, like another religion takes it, but because you see, when Nevi'im were given prophecy, you read this in the Ramban, for example. When a Navi was given prophecy, he had images implanted right into his mind. And then but these images were not literal like words. They weren't words like was given to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, he spoke to Hashem, right, face to face, like word to word, right? And the language of Moshe Rabbeinu just says, and this is what Hashem says. Words, real clear words, like you're hearing my words now. But when all the other Nevi'im received Nevuah, when they all received prophecy, they didn't have Nevuah like Moshe Rabbeinu. They didn't receive it in words. They received it in images, in pictures, in metaphors. And then they had a choice. And different Nevi'im, in different situations, chose to do different things. Some of them explained not only the image, but they also explained its interpretation. Sometimes they just explained the interpretation and they didn't tell you what the image was. And other times they explained to you the metaphor, the image, but they didn't explain it to you. This happens. You can see this all throughout the Nevi'im. So we have to understand that when a Navi is giving you a picture, he's not giving you a literal understanding of something. He's giving you a Nevuah. And now the question is, what does it mean? That's the question. That's the question. And so when it says about Mashiach that he is an ani, he's a poor person, maybe he is physically poor, but that's not the point. The point is he just says he's not an impressive individual. He's not a world leader. He's not like Musk, or like Trump. It's got, millions and billions of dollars and everybody looks at him and finds him impressive. No, he's just the opposite. Just the opposite. A poor person riding a donkey does not look impressive. That's the image that the Navi wants us to understand. It's not an impressive looking thing. And because it's not impressive looking, it's mocked. It's mocked. Let's go on. And this is what the people say. Kol malchei ha'olam. How is he going to defeat all the kings of the world? No, we don't have a lot of kings in the world today. So once again, you have to approach these words with a bit of seichel. You could translate it more modern like this. How is this guy going to defeat all the presidents, all the prime ministers, and all the super, highfalutin dignitaries in our world that are in charge of all the countries? You look, and this is what the Navi is telling us. When you look at the Mashiach in the beginning of his coming, it makes no logical sense to the way the world operates. That's the point that the Navi is telling us. It doesn't make any sense. It's not the way the world operates for the past almost 6,000 years. The world doesn't operate like that. If you want to be a leader of a country, you have to be somebody like Donald Trump. No, now you get to be a leader. You need to be somebody like Vladimir Putin. Oh, now I can be a leader because I have whatever, you can fill in the blank. I don't want to get political, but it's obvious that there's a contrast here. And so when somebody looks, if he's able to have seen Mashiach in the beginning of his coming, he says, this doesn't make any sense. This person is going to defeat all the presidents and prime ministers and world leaders? It's laughable to people that they have no seichel. Shekulam hechaziku b'Yisrael. Why must Mashiach defeat all of the leaders of the world? Again, he's not doing it through bullets. He's not doing it through an army. We already learned that, but we're going to, again, continue to see this. In fact, Rabbi Nachman says in Likutei Moran that Mashiach comes without firing a single bullet. He's not a political figure. He's not a political figure. I'll say it again. There are certain streams, even within Judaism, that want to insist that Mashiach is going to come out of the political system here, even in Eretz Israel. It's not true. It's not what our Torah says. It's an invented Torah by other people who came along with a different Masorah. I'm speaking plainly because it needs to be spoken plainly. But you see, all the nations of the world have a grab hold of the Jewish people So now there's a threat from Iran, before there's a threat from Germany, and another threat from Iraq, and another threat from Syria, and a threat from Turkey, and a threat from Hamas, and on it goes. The threats never end in that sense. So they say, how can this, quote, pathetic, despised, despicable person that looks like a joke, how can this person be expected to defeat the whole world's structure? That's what they're saying. That's the shamamu. That's the shamamu. That's the fact that they're completely astonished by it. It makes no sense to them. And to accept it as truth would involve that they would have to turn everything about their whole worldview completely upside down. And they're not willing to do that. How is he going to get them out from the control of all of the Goyish leaders? Just as we saw last week. What did we say about last week? We saw last week that the Ramban equates, as the Navi does, he equates Mashiach with Moshe. In fact, the Zohar says it explicitly that Mashiach is Moshe. So therefore we should expect the same kind of thing. And that's exactly what the Ramban here is saying. He's saying the exact same thing. Just like Paro did with Moshe. What do you mean, just like he did? How did Paro treat Moshe? Let's read the next few words. Malig alav. He mocked him. Right? That's what the world leaders do to the great Jewish sages. They mock them, and they're going to mock Mashiach. So if you are going to expect to see some great Jewish figure that's coming out of the shadows slowly, and everybody going to be so impressed. No, that's not the Mashiach of our holy Torah. Just the opposite. Because look what Moshe Rabbeinu says about Paro. He says, "Hey, Bnei Yisrael lo shamu elai." You see, Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, they don't even believe me. They don't listen to me. Ve'ech yishma'eni Paro. So how's Paro going to listen to me? Vani aral sfatayim. I am a person of uncircumcised lips. What does it mean to have uncircumcised lips? So to be uncircumcised means that there's a block. There's a block. How was Moshe Rabbeinu's lips blocked? We know from Chazal, we know from Pesukim. They didn't talk normal. He stuttered, he stammered, he had a difficult time speaking. So again, this is pointing to the fact that if you see somebody, look at Trump, look at Putin, look at all these, I can't think of the other ones, whoever they are, I don't care what they are. But, most of them, they're all very eloquent, they talk so nicely, and they're very convincing, and they're charismatic. There's been very charismatic leaders in the past too. I won't name them by name, but some of them they should sure pop up in your mind. Terrible people, world leaders, but very charismatic and very good with their words. And so they can sway people to their own, perspective and their own point of view. Not the case with Mashiach. Why? Because we see it with Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, he said to Hashem, I don't talk well. I stammer, I stutter, I sound stupid when I speak. So Hashem said, I'll send your brother. He'll speak. Yeah, I'll tell you what to say. And then Aaron, your brother, he's going to speak. He has a nice way of talking. But the point is that's Mashiach. He just doesn't look normal. He doesn't act normal. He doesn't speak normal. He looks, quote, like a joke to people. That's the truth. And that goes against the grain 100% for almost everybody on the world. All right. That's the Ramban's words on those first 4 words of verse 14. Now, the Ramban does not discuss the rest of the pasuk. Why not? Because he doesn't need to. He doesn't need to because he says, if you understand what I've just written, then the rest of the pasuk just follows from that. So now, what we're going to have to do is explain it, according to what we've already read. But now it's my interpretation, it's my interpretive explanation because it's not literally the Ramban's words. But it must follow in the flavor and in the style of what the Ramban has been saying. So let's go back now to the pasuk and read the rest of it. It says, Ken mishchat meish marehu. What does that mean? So most people translate the word mishchat like he's marred. He's got some kind of defect. He looks terrible, right? As is the case in this other religion, where they have this image of this Mashiach of theirs who, is all beaten up and everything. Right? He looks terrible. That's not the meaning here because doesn't at all flow from what the Ramban's been talking about. The Ramban has been talking about a Mashiach who doesn't fit the way people want him to fit. He doesn't look that way. Not look physically, but look conceptually. That's the point. We're not talking about his physical appearance. Although in a sense it is physical because he can appear. But the point is not literally what he physically looks like. It's what he literally appears as. That's the marring. The marring, if you want to use that word, mishkat, marring, is that, what is it? Mishkat me'ish mariu. His appearing, meaning not physical appearance, but his position on the world stage, how he begins to appear in the world, how he begins to, the beginning of his coming, that's kind of marred in the eyes of the people in the world who see him. That doesn't make any sense. And the mocking comes along. That's the meaning of mishkat me'ish marehu. That his appearance is like more marred, more blemished, more defective than anybody else. Who anybody else? Than any other world leader. That's the point, because Mashiach is ultimately to be a world leader, but he's not like the other world leaders, and that's the context of these words from the Navi. So the defect is not physically a defect. The defect is actually in people's minds as they look upon Mashiach and they say, that makes no sense to us. And when he appears, his appearing, which we already learned is a process, so unlike world leaders as they appear on the world stage. That's the true meaning of these words. So people see the outward aspect of Mashiach, and it's not impressive looking. They don't see the inward, which is what we read last week, which is the fact that he has seichel greater than even the angels. And so there's a disconnect in the way Mashiach wants to be revealed. And this is a very fundamental question. Why? Why is it that Mashiach has such tremendous seichel, and yet appears to be so, not just ordinary, but less than ordinary? The answer is very simple. Because through that less than ordinary appearing, that's dafka the way that he's able to obtain the great seichel that he has. They're connected. There's no other way for Mashiach to rise to such great levels. You see this clearly spelled out in Likutei Moharan, that in order to rise up and up and up and up and up from madrega to madrega to madrega to the absolutely subliminal and holy levels that you can't even imagine, that has to come through disgrace. When a person is disgraced, bizyonot, and he's insulted and he's mocked and he stays silent in the face of that, he just goes up and up and up and up. So these two things are not coincidental. They're literally cause and effect. They're cause and effect. The Mashiach must dafka look that way. He must dafka appear that way, because only through that mechanism was he able to become Mashiach, to have the great seichel that we already talked about. And the last part of the pasuk says, "V'taro mi bnei adam." His stature, not his physical appearance, not his beauty or his physical, facial visage. Visage? Did I say the word visage? That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about his stature in the world. He just doesn't. It's the same thing over and over and over again. That the pasuk keeps telling us the same thing to make sure that we don't get it wrong. And yeah, so many people got it wrong. So the key in understanding verse 14 is that the physical appearance of the early coming of Mashiach in the early stages does not match his internal greatness. That's the key, and that's the point that the pasuk is saying. That's what the Navi is telling us. That's what the Navi is telling us. Expect that. Expect the beginning of Mashiach's appearance, that you will see a complete disconnect between the real greatness that he really is inside and what you see on the outside. Expect that. And that's the beginning of Mashiach's coming. That's the marred. The marring is really the marring in people's minds. It's the marring of their own expectations. They're not expecting this. They're not expecting it. And let's go now to verse 15. Ken yazeh goyim rabim. First statement. Ken yazeh goyim rabim. Which really means, thus, many, the goyim, meaning the non-Jews, many non-Jews, right? Goyim rabim, many nations, many countries, many non-Jewish nations. He will what? He will sprinkle. That's literally what the word means. He will sprinkle. Now right away, you see how without properly knowing our own Masorah, another tradition moved into the gap, meaning because we didn't know any better, and implied their own religious ideas into what he must be sprinkling them with. But the pasuk doesn't say sprinkling with anything necessarily physical at all. But we'll get there. But just be aware, the word does say sprinkling. Now the next part says, Alav yikpetsu malachim pihem. About him, the kings will close or clamp shut their mouths. Because you see, look at the world today. many kings, many world leaders, many presidents, many prime ministers, oh, they got lots of stuff to say. They have lots of words to say. Pompous statements about this and pompous statements about that. If there's one thing that's common amongst most all the world leaders is pomposity, arrogance, and lack of humility. So all of a sudden, now, when is it that these kings and all these world leaders decide they're going to, all of a sudden, they just clamp their mouth shut? Well, it's not the beginning of Mashiach's coming, obviously, because at the beginning of Mashiach's coming, what do? They mocked him. So there's a period of time between the beginning when Mashiach is the object of mockery, and now there's a period of time, all of a sudden, at some point, which is now the absolute real revelation of Mashiach, what happens? The world leaders just voluntarily shut up. Why? Because they know they have nothing more to say. They've been completely humbled. They realize they were really, really, really wrong. And so they just stopped talking. They stopped giving their speeches. You stop seeing them on, CNN or whatever these days, whatever it is where people see all this stuff. They have nothing to say. Can you imagine a world like that? All of a sudden, all the world leaders, they have nothing to say. That's what it says. The next part says, Ki asher lo supar lehem ra'u. Because what wasn't told them, they see. Which we'll have to explain what that means. But again, what wasn't told them, they see. Now, normally, being told something, you hear. But it doesn't say that. It says, because what wasn't told to them, they now see. Should be pretty obvious, the flow. It's the same flow. There's a turning around. All of a sudden, the tables turn. And what they were not told. What weren't they told? They weren't really told the truth of Mashiach. Not really. They were told a false ideology about Mashiach. So it wasn't told to them. And you can even say another further idea about it wasn't told to them. It couldn't have been told to them. There's no way to articulate in real words, even what I'm trying to do here now, is not even approaching the reality of what will be when Mashiach reveals himself. Just a little smattering, a little hints here and there. And that's what it's meant. Ki asher lo supar lahem. It wasn't told to them. It wasn't told to them because it couldn't have been told to them. There was no way for them to even heard it, to have comprehended it. No words were able to explain the essence of Mashiach. Why? Because Mashiach is inside. His innerness is completely hidden from the world. How do you explain that? How do you reveal that? How do you tell that to people? When they see it with their eyes, they don't see anything. So they weren't able to see. But eventually, they're going to see. Not see with their eyes, but really see deep down in their own mind, in their own spirit. They're going to comprehend it. But not now. They don't comprehend it right now. They're eventually going to have a direct encounter with truth that they can't deny. Right now, they can deny. The next phrase says, V'asher lo shamu hit bonanu. That which they didn't hear, meaning again, they didn't internalize it before. Now what's going to happen? Hit bonanu. They're now going to really contemplate. That's what the word means. It means deeply contemplate. Sustained inner thinking, discernment. It comes from the word ben, like between, right? Hit bonanu comes from the root ben, which means to distinguish between one thing and the other. Now, how do you do that? You need time. You need time because all those years, all that wrong ideology was all pumping into their brain. They're now looking at whoever Mashiach is. They were looking at Mashiach and deriding him and mocking him and humiliating him and contributing to all of his suffering. Hashem is in charge of that in order to elevate him. It all has a purpose. But now all of a sudden they realize they were wrong. You don't just flip on a dime. Most people don't do that. People need time to sort it out, to process it inside of them. That's what the Navi is saying. Now, at the end of this pasuk, there's a closing part of the Torah, of the Navi. You can see the letter Samech, which is a stuma, meaning that these three verses close at this point. It's all, and that's why they really form a cohesive introduction to Mashiach. What comes up, I'll just mention it now so I don't forget it. What comes up later on in chapter 53 is an expansion of what's already been revealed in these three verses. These three verses form a cohesive account of Mashiach, the big picture. What do these three pasukim say? Number one, he is awesome seichel, beyond comprehension. His greatness is beyond comprehension, but it's not revealed. You don't see it. It doesn't look like that on the outside. And so as a result, people mock him and they belittle him and they make fun of him. But eventually, when Mashiach chooses to make his greatness known, when Hashem says, now it's time, Moshe Rabbeinu, you must now be sent, everything turns. Everything turns upside down. And all the nations, all the peoples realize how wrong they were. And that's going to take time. It's going to take time for them to process how wrong they were about so many things. That's the essence of these 3 verses. And so those 3 verses ends with a stuma, with a close. In other words, that's its own little paragraph. And so now what you read about in chapter 53 is just, it's separate, but it's an expansion of all the details of what Mashiach goes through in order to have arrived at that tremendous high level. That's really the structure within these verses. All right, so now let's read the Ramban here on these words. It says, first of all, we already read, Kain yazeh goyim rabim. Thus he will sprinkle many goyim. Not talking about Jews here, talking goyim rabim, many nations, non-Jewish nations. People of the world, they're going to be sprinkled. Now, what does that mean? So the Ramban is going to tell us what he believes it to mean. So let's read what he says. Yomar kasher yomer just. They said the following: Ha'ish hazeh mishchat moreu. Like we already said, they already said this man. He's a joke. He's a disgrace. He doesn't fit our model at all. He's the most marred. If you were to have like a yearbook, statement, and you have a picture of Mashiach when he's 18, graduated from high school, and it says, most likely not to succeed. That's what people would think of him. It's just the other way around. But that's what it means by Ha'ish hazeh mishchat mareu. No way that man is going to become anything great. That's the way people see. So just like they said that, Kain yomeru, now they're going to say, what is now? What is this now? Atah now. It means after he's revealed. So we see that there is a beginning of Mashiach's coming where he allows the disgrace to fall upon him. And then there's a process. We don't know how long that process takes, by the way. And then there's the ultimate revelation. So now that's the atah. That's the atah right here. That's the now. What is the now? Shetatif milato alehem. That he will drip or flow his word upon them. This is the Ramban's explanation of that he will sprinkle. He will sprinkle. Like you have water that's sprinkling on people. It's not blood. He's not sprinkling blood on people to give some kind of an atonement to them. That's not the image at all. The image here is clearly the sprinkling of his das, the sprinkling of this great seichel that he developed over many, many years. They didn't want anything to do with him. They didn't want they didn't want to hear anything he had to say. And now all of a sudden, when they realize, oh man, wow, now what's going to happen? Mashiach doesn't hate people. He doesn't hate them. He's going to start to sprinkle his das upon them. This is like the paraduma, because the paraduma waters was also water. And what did the paraduma's water? What did the paraduma waters do? The mechatat. They turned somebody who was tameh and he became tahor. That's the image here. It's not an image of a blood sacrifice being sprinkled on people. It's the image of the mechatat, the paraduma, who purifies people who used to be immersed in tuma. That sprinkling is a sprinkling of das, is a sprinkling of his tremendous seichel. That's what's going, and where's it going to go? Into their minds. Again, it's not literal, it's not physical. It's a concept. It's a concept. So these words are like dripping and sprinkling out of his mouth, and they're landing on people, and it's slowly beginning to infiltrate into their minds. That's why it takes time, because it's not something that can happen in an instant. So that's what happens to the Goyim Rabim. Now let's go on, because the pasuk said that the kings shut their mouths. So on the one hand, the Ramban just finished telling us that Mashiach is going to sprinkle his word, his teaching, his das upon people, like it says in also earlier in Yeshayahu, that the whole world is going to be filled with the das of Hashem, with the da'at of Hashem, just like how deep the waters cover the ocean bed. That's where's it going to come from? It's going to come from Mashiach. And it has to start sprinkling at first. It can't just be like, like when it rains. You can't start with a big flood, a big downpour. It'll drown everybody. So it's just a little sprinkle. We even use the word in English. Oh, what's it do? Oh, it's just sprinkling out. It's just sprinkling now, like sprinkling. It's just a light rain. That's the beginning of Mashiach when he's been revealed. He has to just start sprinkling because he can't overwhelm people. Too much would be just too overwhelming. These peoples of the world that are willing to learn and to be taught from Mashiach by the sprinkling of his teaching, what do? Yiparu l'malkosh devro. They open wide their mouths. It's like they're parched. The idea is that the Navi is describing how parched they really are. And if you're really, really parched and you're super thirsty and it starts to sprinkle rain, what do people do? They open their mouth, they're trying to get every last drop they can. That's the image. That's the image. Not just that they open their mouth to speak. They're not opening up their mouth to speak. They're opening up their mouth wide to try to get as much possible teaching from Mashiach because they are so literally parched. Spiritually speaking, dry. And it says, L'malkosh devro, malkosh is the latter rain. The latter rain is the rain that comes after he's revealed. The former rain, they didn't want anything to do with the former rain, R-A-I-N, not R-E-I-G-N. They didn't want anything to do with the former rain because they mocked it. But now that he's revealed and it's all super clear and everything is like out in the open, all the cards on the table, now they want that latter rain, which is what? Divaro. He says right here, it's his words, not some blood sacrifice or sacrificial atonement. It's his teaching. That's what really purifies people. Now he goes on with the rest of the pasuk. Alav yikbetzu malachim pihem. But as the peoples, ordinary citizens of the world, ordinary Filipinos, ordinary Brazilians, ordinary Spaniards, whatever, they're eager. They don't have really an agenda so much. But the world leaders are in another category. So what about the world leaders? They says that they clamp shut their mouth. They don't want anything to do with it because they've been humiliated in a really serious way. And it's going to take a little bit more introspection for them. But they realize they have to be quiet. Silence for them is the way to go. There's nothing for them now to say. All they can possibly say is, oops. That's what it. Sorry. Sometimes words just aren't enough. So they don't say anything. Which is a smart thing to do. But because their lips, their mouths are clamped, they're not really able to receive from the holy teaching of Mashiach. V'yiskaru pehem. And their mouths were like closed. Va'afilu b'chadar mashkitam. Even in their inner decorated private rooms, where they have all their wealth on display. After they robbed and cheated, the average citizen of the country from their wealth that was really due to the average person. So now they're in their really decorated special rooms where all their wealth is on display. Yireim mil daber alav. They're afraid to speak against Mashiach. So why? Why don't they speak against Mashiach in their own inner rooms? Because they know that Mashiach knows exactly what they're saying. They know. It's obvious. So they are very careful not to say anything, even in the privacy of their own special little rooms. V'yomeru ish el rehu, and they each say to each other, you better be quiet, guys, because Mashiach, he knows what you're going to say. He's got, you can see from one end of the world to the other end of the world, so you don't think you can hear me or whatever I'm saying here in the private room? So now, they're actually fulfilling the word of a pasuk in Kohelet, which is what Kohelet, Ecclesiastes in English, chapter 10, verse 2, says, Gam be'madach, even in your own mind, melech al tekalel, do not curse the king. So they're actually beginning to realize, we have to be super careful. We don't get just to shoot off our lips any way we want anymore. So what have we seen in summary? We've seen that the process that the Ramban is opening up for us, that the Navi revealed to us, is it starts off with tremendous seichel that's hidden. That's the key. It's hidden seichel at the beginning of Mashiach's coming. And as a result, it doesn't make any sense. And so the people are shammamu. They're completely bewildered, shocked, astonished. It makes no sense to them. And as a result, they scorn it. They scorn what they cannot believe, what they cannot comprehend. And that's the mockery. And then that shock when Mashiach is finally revealed turns to silence, which is a good response. The kings of the nation just shut up. They have nothing more to say. And yet the peoples of the world are willing to drink in. They're willing to drink in of the true wisdom of Mashiach. Because he's not just a Mashiach to the Jewish people, although he is. He's a Jewish Mashiach to redeem the Jewish people. He's like Moshe. But it's now the whole world is going to come to the knowledge of Hashem. This is the role of Mashiach. So I think you can see now, we're going to end here. I think it's pretty obvious that when you think about it, these 3 psukim is really, from beginning to end, the whole picture. That's it. That's the whole scenario of Mashiach from beginning to end. It tells us so much. So much. There's not an instantaneous, boom, Mashiach is here. No. That's not taught by Chazal. It's not taught by the Navi. Mashiach comes through a process. He's a donkey rider. And it doesn't make any sense to people. It looks terrible. You can't speak properly. You know, on and it goes. And now, what we're going to do next time is, we're going to unpack it further, because chapter 53 now is not a testimony of people who witness about, their version of Messiah, but rather it's a continuation unpacking what the Goyim say. That's what it is. And so once you read chapter 53, as it flows from these 3 introductory verses, it's obvious that it's the same thing. It's obvious that it's the same people speaking. It's the kings of the world, it's the nations of the world speaking and saying, whoa, did we ever misunderstand? And then they begin to they begin to unpack what the Mashiach was willing to go through and what he went through all those years, from his beginning of his revelation all the way to the ultimate revelation, as he's gaining in seichel and seichel and seichel, going up level upon level upon level, what he had to endure in order to do that. That's where we go next time, B'ezrat Hashem. Till then, have yourselves a great week.